history project, and I guess we can start. So to start off, what's your name and where were you born?
My name is Vera Bahry. I go mostly by Joe. I was born in Chicago and have lived in the Midwest most of my life, and finally wound up here in Benzie County.
Okay. And who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My mother was Vera Craft Noble. She trained as a home economics teacher at the University of Illinois. She graduated in 1930, and my father graduated in 1929 from the U of I as an architectural engineer. And then they lived in Chicago, where I was born. And then Dad's job took him to Cincinnati, and then to Cleveland, and ultimately back to Chicago in 1948. And I went to high school there.
So, did you have any siblings?
Yes, my younger sister, Dory Noble Turner, lives out at Watervale, and my brother, Vernon Haven Noble, alias Skip, lives out at Watervale also.
Okay, did any of them serve in the military as well?
My brother did, yes. He's also retired Navy Reserve.
Okay. So what were your parents and siblings' feelings about you joining the service?
They encouraged it.
Okay.
I think it made my mother a little nervous, but my uncle had been my uncle was a doctor. He had been in the Navy during World War II and remained in the reserves. And he definitely encouraged me to do it. I decided my junior year in high school I was going to be a nurse. I was going to college, I was going to be a nurse, and I was going into the Navy. A, B, C.
So what high school and college did you attend?
New Trier High School in Winnetka, Illinois, and then Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. And then I went from there to nursing school at Cornell University New York Hospital in New York City.
Did you hold any jobs before entering the service?
No.
No? Okay.
I graduated from nursing school at 10 in the morning, was commissioned in the Navy at 11, and was sent to Newport for officer orientation right away, so no.
So can you tell us a little bit about when you went into the military?
I'm sorry?
When you went into the military, can you tell us about that?
I didn't quite understand what you were saying.
I'm sorry, just a little bit about the time you went into the military.
I went into the military in 1961. Actually, I was in the military my senior year in nursing school, is what they called a Nurse Corps candidate. But I went in 1961 and joined the Navy to see the world, and was sent to Great Lakes for my first duty station, 20 miles from home. But it was a very good experience. And I think my first awareness of the fact that this was not just standard nursing was one fall afternoon in 1962 when our nursing director came in and into the recovery room where I was working and said, "Miss Smith, you'll stay. Miss Jones, you'll stay. Miss Noble, you'll go." And I looked at her and said, "Go where?" She said, "Key West for the Cuban Missile Crisis, if necessary." As it turned out not to be necessary, but for the next 2 months I had a packed suitcase in the trunk of my car so that I could report to Glenview Naval Air Station on 30 minutes notice to fly south. Yeah.
So was to see the world your reason for joining, or was there anything else that
No,
encouraged
it was, I knew I would get a very good nursing experience. And nursing was my career.
So who and what did you leave behind when you left to serve?
Nothing.
Okay. Was it difficult for your family to watch you go?
No.
No. So they were supportive though, for the most part?
Yeah.
Okay. So you said you entered into the Navy, correct?
It's kind of hard to hear you.
I'm sorry.
Part of it is my hearing.
Oh no, that's okay. So you said you entered the Navy, correct?
Yes,
And why did you choose that branch?
Uncle Freddie.
Okay.
It was very simple. After he got over my refusal to go to medical school, he encouraged me to very definitely to join the Navy. And I never really had any other, I never really had any other choice. It was that one from the beginning.
Okay. So can you tell me a little bit about the training that you went through?
As far as training for the Navy, we had an 8-week orientation at the Women Officers School in Newport, Rhode Island. But that was mostly in military customs, courtesy, how to wear the uniform,
Okay.
what ships looked like.
So what was the best part of the training? If there was one.
I think the night that I wound up with all the demerits because I thought there was a fire in the barracks, and there was smoke, and we were smelling smoke. And I had lived in a ramshackle dorm at Carleton for 2 years where we had really rigorous fire drills every month. And I just told everybody, grab a coat, put your shoes on, put a towel over your head, and get out into the parking lot. And we all did, and the staff duty officer came and put everyone on report for wearing uniform items with civilian clothing, i.e. our overcoats over our pajamas. And I got 2 demerits because I had instigated the whole thing.
Oh my goodness. So then what was the worst part?
Keeping my big mouth shut for 8 weeks.
So what was it like adapting to the military lifestyle?
For me, it was not difficult. It really wasn't. And I thoroughly enjoyed the nursing experiences that I was getting and the training that in progressing in nursing that I was doing.
So do you think you were prepared for the journey you were about to embark on?
Which journey?
The journey of just serving and being in the Navy.
Yes.
You were prepared?
Yes.
Did you do anything to mentally prepare yourself for it?
No, not really. I mean, to me, I had decided, as I say, my junior year in high school, that I wanted to be a nurse and I wanted to go into the Navy, and that was my whole focus all the way through college and nursing school.
Okay. So where did you serve?
I started out at Great Lakes for 2 years, and my original plan had been to go into the reserves after that and go back to graduate school for 2 years. But they offered me an option to go to Guam, and I decided graduate school could wait a while. And I loved the 21 months I was on Guam. I learned how to scuba dive 2 weeks after I got there, and I don't think I ever dried out for the next 20 months. And but the nursing was fascinating too. It ultimately led me to my later career as a nurse midwife, because in order to work and not have to be in a full uniform all the time, I worked in labor and delivery because I could put a scrub cap on and the chief nurse wouldn't know my hair was still soaking wet from coming out of the ocean. And so I worked in labor and delivery most of the time I was there, which wasn't my main focus at the time, but it was an interesting experience. And when I came back and did transfer to the Ready Reserve for 2 years to go to graduate school, I did my graduate work in medical surgical nursing and then went back on active duty in 1967.
Okay. So out of all the places that you went to, did you have a favorite place?
Well, after Guam, of course, when I went back on active duty, I went to Bethesda for 2 years. And then I went to Vietnam for 9 months after that. It should have been a year, but they closed the hospital. And I came back and was sent back to Great Lakes again to teach at Hospital Corps School, where we trained our enlisted corpsmen. And I said, I actually called Washington to what they call my detailer, at the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. I said, why do I have to keep going back to Great Lakes? Every other nurse I know gets to go to the West Coast. She said, you're one of the few nurses we know can tolerate the winters. But I taught at Hospital Corps School for a year, and at the end of that year, my husband and I were married. And he was to be stationed at Great Lakes and at Camp Pendleton, and the Navy transferred me to Camp Pendleton to be stationed with him. So until 1973, until 1973, I was at Camp Pendleton. I enjoyed all of them. Guam obviously was the most fun,
Yes, that sounds like.
but the most career enjoyable experiences were at Bethesda and in Da Nang.
Oh, okay. So what was a typical day like for you?
It depended on which shift I was working, but get up at 5:30 in the morning, get my uniform on, get in the car, drive to work, and spend the next 8 hours on the ward that I was in charge of, and worked at taking care of patients and training and, supervising my corpsmen and furthering their training, and working with the doctors. And it was, I honestly don't think I ever hated going to work.
That's good. That's better than most people. So how did the wartime experience change you?
Made me much more aware of what the men were going through. As a nurse, I was not exposed to all of that.
Right.
As a woman. We lived in an air-conditioned Quonset hut, which was certainly better than most of the men had. And we worked at the station hospital in Da Nang, we worked in butler hut, prefabricated buildings, but we had the equipment we needed to work with, and it made the difference.
So what kind of friendships did you make from serving?
The friendship of a lot of the nurses that I worked with, particularly the ones in Da Nang, we were a very close-knit group. And my best friend and I went on leave together to Hong Kong and ultimately to Australia. And then when they closed the hospital down, her name was Charlene Sakanis. She was going to recruiting duty in her hometown of Cleveland, and I was going back to Great Lakes, which was 20 miles from my home. And so neither one of us felt compelled to spend our leave with our anxious families. We went to Bangkok, and then we went up to Japan for the 1970 World's Fair, and ultimately wound our way back to the West Coast and picked up my car, which I had left with my brother in San Diego. And Char and I drove to Chicago, and I put her on a plane to Cleveland. And we had then ultimately, 2 years later, when I was finishing up some work from school, I stayed with her in Cleveland at her apartment. And then I went out to California, and she went to Great Lakes. And she was killed she was night supervisor at the hospital, and in one winter evening she went out to the garage and turned on her car to warm it up while she turned to go back into the house to get something, and the door had locked behind her and she didn't have the keys. And they found her dead in the garage later that night. When she didn't show up at the hospital, they came to find her, and she was dead. That hurt. But several of the other nurses that I knew out in California belonged to the Navy Nurse Corps Association chapter out there with me, and we call ourselves the Da Nang Gang.
I love it. So did you stay in touch with anybody?
With them, through the Nurse Corps Association, yes.
So while you were serving, how did you keep in contact with friends and family back home?
Letters. This was the pre-computer age.
Yeah.
Since I had a couple of telephone conversations with my parents from Guam. From Da Nang, it was mostly letters. Some of them I never told my mother were written lying on a gurney pad under my bunk at night when the alert siren had gone off. And I would be under the bunk writing letters by flashlight just to kill time until I could get back in bed. I never told Mother how those letters were written.
So what did you do for recreation when you were off duty?
Guam was no problems. I was busy scuba diving, or skin diving, or on days when it was too rough to dive, the diving club would go out and do things like rock climbing and rappelling off the rock cliffs. That was busy. When I was stationed at Bethesda, I spent a lot of time exploring the area. I've always been interested in geology. My college roommate and I had made several trips across country through the national park system. And she came down a couple of times and we went on tours through some of the parks on the East Coast.
So can you tell me about any particularly humorous or unusual events that happened?
A number of them. But I think the funniest one maybe was, well, so the incident about the fire drill was probably the funniest. Another funny one was actually in Da Nang. We had a patient who had stepped on a landmine, and most of the mobile equipment in the ICU was around his bed, and some of the stuff was under the bed, and it was one of those machines that malfunctioned. And so I was wearing a scrub dress, thank the Lord, and I was under the bed on my hands and knees fixing that particular machine. And as I was screwing the top back down with the open blade on my bandage scissors, I heard the thump of several coordinated combat boots coming in the door. I just kept finishing up what I was doing, and the Lieutenant JG nurse who was working with me that day said, "Joe, get out from under the bed." I said, "Just a blankety-blank minute till I get this thing fixed." She said very formally, "Miss Noble, I think you'd better get out from under the bed." And I looked out, and all I saw 3 shiny combat boots and pressed camis, and I kept looking farther up and started counting stars on the collar of the one in front, and it was the 3-star general, the commanding general of I Corps. And I backed out from under the bed, and my cap caught on the springs and wound up hanging over my right ear backwards. And I was standing at attention in front of the general with the cap hanging down and the bandage scissors on my hand. And said, "Good afternoon, General. I'm Miss Noble, the charge nurse. How can I help you?" I thought we were going to have to give CPR to the colonel behind me who was about to choke, trying not to laugh. I just reached up and took the cap off and thought, yeah, that was one of the more interesting episodes.
Sounds like it. So did you ever do anything for good luck?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Were there many particularly frightening moments of your service?
No. I don't really. The one time I knew I was in deep trouble, but I knew I could get out of it with my diving buddy was scuba diving on Guam. We went into some rough surf we shouldn't have gone into, and the others who were going out with us all backed out, but we kept going and wound up offshore and knew we were going to have a really hard time getting back in, and we just looked at each other and held hands and got back in. A little coral scraped, but otherwise intact.
So were there any days of your service that you vividly remember?
Practically all of it.
Really?
Practically all of it.
So how did your time serving affect your skills as a nurse?
It made them. It made them.
So what was the most difficult thing about your experience as a nurse?
I really can't recall any time that was that difficult. I thought that my education and my experience had prepared me for everything, and it truly did. I never questioned my choices, and I never, as I say, I never really was in over my head.
So what kind of challenges, if any, did you face being a woman in the service?
A number in those days.
Is there any
But
more
I
explanation?
think that the time it really hit home was on the plane going out to Vietnam. We flew into Hawaii, and we were supposed to continue on to Okinawa, but there was a cyclone hitting Okinawa, and they took the civilians were all taken off the plane and left only the military people going on. And it turned out there was a leak in one of the air conditioning vents, and the stewardesses were trying to patch it with bandages from the first aid kit. And the guys finally decided I needed to be the one sitting under it because my uniform was Dacron cotton and therefore drip dry.
Oh.
I said, gee, thanks, guys.
Yeah. So many Vietnam War veterans have experienced some sort of backlash after returning home. Did you experience much of that?
I don't think so in the sense that they do, but on the other hand, my experiences as a nurse in a more protected environment didn't even come close to equaling what they were going through. I know I don't discuss the Vietnam experience very often in strictly civilian settings. On the other hand, my husband and my brother, my husband had 3 tours in Vietnam as a Marine, and my brother served as a destroyer sailor in the Gulf of Tonkin. He was gunnery officer on a destroyer. And the family table conversations get pretty hilarious.
Oh, do they?
Because they do tie together in many instances. So I really have not had a problem with. After I left active duty in 1973, just before our daughter was born, and I transferred right to the Ready Reserve. And as I was saying downstairs, I subsequently went back to school for a year when KJ was 3.5. No, when KJ was 3.5. I went back to school. No, she was 5. I went back to school for a year and used my GI Bill to become a nurse midwife. And I then spent the next 19 years in active nurse midwifery practice through the University of California. That's really the second half of my life as a nurse. And I thoroughly enjoyed that, but at the same time I was in the Ready Reserve and doing my weekend a month and my 2 weeks active duty for training every year. Once I was a nurse midwife, I was then usually working as a nurse midwife for the Navy for those 2 weeks. The last time they sent me in 1990, they sent me over to Yokosuka, Japan, to work for several weeks, 9 months after the carrier battle group had come back from an extended deployment. And the obstetricians were going crazy trying to keep up with the deliveries. So I spent 2 weeks basically in the labor and delivery unit. But again, that was what I chose to be. Navy and nurse midwifery.
So do you recall the day that your service ended?
Not really. in 19, I mean, I put in my letter of transfer to the retired rank in October of 1991. I retired on 30 years service.
So what were your emotions leaving Vietnam?
Sorry to be leaving people behind that still needed my care.
So in the information that I have provided about you, it says that you've earned a plethora of awards or medals from your service, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how some of those were earned.
Most of them were earned by being there.
Oh, okay.
No, the Navy Commendation Medal was initially awarded to those of us in those nurses who had worked in the ICU in Da Nang. And the second award came in when my unit was recalled to active duty in 1991 for Desert Storm. And instead of working as a nurse midwife at the University of California, San Diego Medical Center, I went a half mile north to the National Naval Medical Center the Naval Hospital, San Diego, and worked there for 2 months. Actually, they put me I was too senior to work on the wards, thank you, Lord. And so they asked me if I would please write protocols for the maternal child nursing department because they were getting ready for a major national accreditation exam, which they weren't quite prepared for. And what they got with our reserve unit was 2/3 of the quality assurance team from the San Diego Medical Center. And all of us were put to work on that project. And I spent 2 months on a closed ward all by myself with my textbooks all around me, writing protocols. And long after, they sent me the second award for the Navy Commendation Medal. I don't know why, but it worked. And the others were all, the National Defense Service Medal was the initial ribbon that we got going on active duty in 1961. And the others were basically the reserve medal had a 10-year designation on it, and the mobilization M for when our unit was mobilized. And the others were mostly awards that arose from the Vietnam and from the awards made by the Vietnamese government at the time to the personnel at the hospital.
Okay. So when your service ended, where did you return to?
My home in Carlsbad, California, where I'd lived since 1971. And as I say, by that time I had worked 10 years for the University of California, and then subsequently I worked at the University of California Irvine Medical Center, where we had our own hospital birthing center, midwifery run, and it was the most delightful years of my life.
Oh, really?
And then I went up to the University of California. When that had to close, I went up to the University of California, Los Angeles, into the School of Nursing and taught and practiced nurse midwifery there. I was teaching the whole time I was in the UC system.
Okay. So then how did you end up back in this area in Benzie County?
My parents have retired here. Well, Watervale, as I say, is the family enclave. My parents had purchased Watervale in 1960, and they had moved here when Dad retired in 1975 or 1974, and he helped build their retirement home, which is where I live now. And after I retired I retired from the University of California in 2000. And Mother's health was not the best then, so I started spending a lot more time here to be able to be, especially to be with her during the summer, because my sister by that time was running Watervale. And then after Mother died in 2005, Ted and I moved up here.
And Ted's your husband?
My former husband. We've been divorced for a couple of years, but we're still friends.
So how were you received by your family and community coming home?
From Vietnam? With welcoming arms.
With welcoming arms?
Yeah.
That's good. So then how did you readjust to civilian life?
It was relatively easy for me because after KJ was born, we were still living in Carlsbad. Ted, of course, was in the Marine Corps. And I had a lot of contact with the base. I joined the Navy Nurse Corps Association. I was seeing nurses that I'd served with before. I went to all the continuing education classes out at the hospital with the nurses out there. And I did my reserve duty there 2 weeks every year. So it was not that bad. And when we went to Quantico for 4 years, I started teaching prepared childbirth classes for the Marine Corps wives. I think the most hilarious experience I had was teaching emergency childbirths to the gate guarding MPs who had tried to hold up a car with a very pregnant woman in it because her husband's ID didn't quite match their description.
Oh, goodness.
So they got to deliver the baby at the main gate. And the head of the Red Cross, for whom I was teaching the classes, called me up one morning. She was the commanding general's wife. She said, "Could you teach a class on emergency childbirths to the MPs?" I said, "I think I could manage that." Because I taught it to all the classes that I was teaching. Actually, when I started teaching prepared childbirth out at Camp Pendleton, the first class, the husbands came in literally being dragged by their wives. These were young enlisted men, and they had no idea what was going on. And after the first class of that series, I said, "Ted, you're coming to the next one. You take the guys in a room and tell them this commandant says it's okay to learn this stuff."
Did they listen?
And after that, the husbands were willing to sit up and listen.
Good. So did you ever join a veterans organization?
I belong to the American Legion here. Yeah, well, I considered the Navy Nurse Corps Association that, but I belong to the American Legion here. Ted wouldn't let me join for a long time until they suddenly needed a finance officer. And then he decided I should join. So that was in 2009, and I'm still the finance officer for our Frankfurt Post.
Okay. Do you attend any reunions?
I haven't, mostly because they seem to be so far away. I did go, yes, Ted and I went to the 2002 Navy Nurse Corps Association meeting, which was an Alaskan cruise in June of that year, and enjoyed it very, very much. That's been the only one so far.
Okay. So did your attitudes towards society change after your experience of serving?
In some ways, yes, because I feel that everybody has a duty to, in some way or some fashion or form, serve their community and their country. Not necessarily, for most people, not in the military, but you have to give back to this society.
Absolutely, yeah.
For something.
So how did your military service experiences affect your life?
Almost all of it. I mean, as you can tell from what I've been talking about.
Definitely. So what are some life lessons that you learned from your military service?
As the Boy Scout motto goes, be prepared. Keep that suitcase in the trunk of your car.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Obviously, I'm reasonably pro-military, quite pro-military. I have sometimes doubts about our national command and what it's getting us into.
Okay.
I have a lot of doubts about that at times.
Sounds fun, right?
But I respect my military command structure. I respect the office of the President of the United States.
Okay.
Let's leave it at that.
We can leave it at that. What message would you like to leave for future generations who will hear or see this interview?
Find what you want to do and have a heck of a good time doing it,
I love it.
which is what I've had.
Yeah, sounds like it. Is there any advice that you would give to young women considering joining the service?
Do it. You will learn, even if you're in it for 2, 3, or 4 years, you will learn so much about yourself and so much about how the real world works that it is well worth doing. And if you find you enjoy it, keep doing it.
Are there any progressions in the military system that you would like to see happen?
I think a lot of what I wanted to see has happened in that women are much more fully integrated. When I joined the Navy Nurse Corps in 1961, only women could be nurses, and women could not be doctors, which is one of the reasons I resisted Freddie sending me to medical school.
Right.
Women in the Navy at that time were severely limited to serving in the U.S. A few got to go to Hawaii, a few got to go to London and NATO, but very few and very specialized. That has changed. And that's why I say I would encourage women to join the military in whatever field you want to work in, not just nursing.
Yeah. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time and allowing me to document some of your history as a veteran. So now I just have a few more questions for our conclusion.
Okay.
So is there anything else that you would like to add that we haven't covered in this interview?
I don't think so.
Okay. Is there anything that you've always wanted to share about your service as a veteran or that you never have?
No.
No? Okay. What would you like people to know or remember from your story?
That the career I chose and the reasons I chose it were very worthwhile to me, and I hope to others too. And not only the Navy nursing that I did, but the subsequent nurse midwifery that I did was immensely satisfying.
I can imagine. Is there anything that you wish more people knew about veterans?
That they deserve one heck of a lot of credit
Absolutely.
for what they have done and what they have made of this country and what they have, in many cases, suffered and survived to do it.
So to close, I was wondering if you could share a favorite story or memory from your service.
I think you got most of the good ones.
You got most of it? Is there anything else?
No, we've shared a lot of stories. As I say, my husband was in the Marine Corps, my brother was in the Navy, and I think actually there is one funny story that when I was in graduate school, there was 2 years. The first year, we were a class of 14 nurses in a master's degree program, and 6 of us wound up being stuffed into a medical dental school first year biochemistry physiology class. Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hey, wait a minute. We're nurses. Well, we damn near killed ourselves that year. We studied. I went to bed at night reciting things in my sleep. We wound up graded on a curve with a class of 80 dental students. Nurses got 4 of the A's and 2 of the B pluses.
Wow.
And I went on to finish the second year in graduate school and went to Bethesda for 2 years and did an A for a year and thought nothing more of it. and got to Great Lakes to teach hospital course school, and I hadn't had a dental exam in a year. So I made an appointment at the dental clinic at the hospital and walked in, and the tech put the bib around my neck, and I heard the dentist walk in and pick up my record, and all of a sudden, Vera Joan Noble, you're one of those cotton-picking nurses from Western Reserve University. It was one of the guys in the dental class, because they had posted the grades. I said, started to unclip the bib. He laughed. He said, never mind, I won't take it out on you. That was appalling.
I bet, yeah. Must have been a little bit of a surprise.
Yes, it was. I knew a lot of the guys were being sent to school by the Navy, but they weren't, you know, I walked into class one day in uniform because I'd been doing something with a favor for the recruiting officer. And they looked at me like, what's that uniform? And I thought, it's the one you're going to be wearing in another 3 years.
So thank you again for joining me today and doing this interview.
Melia, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
It was my pleasure, too.